All right, everyone. Hi, welcome to the Applying to Grad School panel / workshop for Botany360. I'm Austin Nguyen. I will be a host / person for this panel along with Emenya Valdez. And to start us off, let's introduce our panelists. If you could just unmute and introduce yourself very briefly. Let's start with Martin.
Hi, I'm Martin Turcott. I'm an associate professor at the University of Pittsburgh. I started 8 years ago. And a mini background, I did my bachelor's in biology at McGill in Montreal. And then I did a PhD in University of California, Riverside, a postdoc at University of Toronto, and then another one at ETH in Zurich, and then professorship. Oh, and I work on plant evolutionary ecology and plant and insect interactions, but mostly plant competition and coexistence and polyploidy.
Tisha, is that how you pronounce it?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tisha King. I'm the program coordinator for the RAMP program at the University of Connecticut. If you're not familiar, RAMP is a post-bac research training program for students who need a little more research experience before applying to school or other careers in STEM. My background, I did my bachelor's at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and I got my PhD from Louisiana State University. My background is more in physiology and neuroscience, but right now the students that I work with are in ecology and evolution, and I mentor them through getting into grad school.
Josh.
Cool. Hey, everybody. I'm Josh Felton. I'm a third-year PhD candidate at Cornell University. I went to a small, predominantly undergrad institution for undergrad, and yeah, I work on mostly on the I work in Bromeliaceae, but then looking at reproductive biology within the group.
Elenis.
Hi everyone, I'm Elenis Avila Lovera. I'm a clinical physiologist and I am an assistant professor at the University of Utah. I also did my PhD at UC Riverside, so that's fun that Martin also did. I studied clinical physiology generally, and then more specifically drought tolerance and what allow plants to cope with drought.
Juan.
Hi everyone. I'm Juan Manuel Celi. I'm currently a graduate student at the University of Michigan. I do research in tropical forest, doing like functional ecology. And my background, I did my undergrad in Colombia, so I had to apply to grad school from Colombia without knowing anything about the system here in the US. So if you have any, well, I guess that's the kind of experience I can bring to the panel today.
Okay, so those are our panelists, but would our student representatives like to introduce themselves just briefly, if you want to?
Yes, my name is Benjamin Ajayi, current student representative, Botanical Society of America. So we are part of the committee of 360 applying for graduate school, and I'm glad to be here, glad to see everybody here. Thank you.
Yeah, and my name is Sara Pedraza. I'm also a student representative for the Botanical Society of America. Also a PhD student at UCLA, and happy to be here. Thank you to our panelists participating in this panel. I think it's going to be super useful for everyone joining.
So I'm gonna start us off with one question and then we can open it up to audience questions. So, what should someone look for in a program when trying to decide to apply? I'm also gonna post the questions in the chat.
I can start. Some of the things that I usually advise the students that I work for to look for or to think about are one, the location of where you want to live, since especially if you're going into a PhD, you want to make sure that it's a place that you actually like. If you don't like the cold environment, then you probably should stay away from places that are cold. I also tell students to think about funding, if there's funding available for you to go through the program. So you should be able to be funded with either a TA so that you're teaching or research assistantship throughout your time in grad school. And I usually advise that if you have to pay, then you should probably look for another program. And also just the fit of the lab, to make sure that the PI is working on topics that you're actually interested in and you can envision yourself working on for a few years if you're doing a PhD or master's program.
Yes, I second that third part where like making sure that there is a good fit between what the lab does and what are your interests. So for example, when I applied for grad school, I applied to 3 programs. And one of them was mostly because my undergrad advisor knew the professor, so they are collaborators, and he told me, yes, this is going to be a good opportunity. But actually, I wasn't sure I wanted to go there because they were doing ecosystem science, where I wanted to be a plant ecophysiologist, right? So I did still apply, so I wouldn't break my undergrad's advisor's heart. But money is like limited, right? Like if you have to apply, or if you want to apply to multiple programs, and you have a limited amount of money, so then really picking those that speak to you are super, super important. And as Tisha said, and like I feel like everyone that I have met who have done a PhD here in the US, is 100% recommended that the department is going to fund you for the whole time of the PhD. Usually, they will say that they're going to fund you for 5 years through a combination of TA-ships and graduate student research positions. And I mean, if you can stick to those 5 years, then you should be fine, right? Because then it's difficult, especially for international students, to be able to apply to extra funding. Let's say if you wanted to stay 1 year more or maybe a few years more. So yeah, just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all those comments. When I started applying as an undergrad, I made a list of all the famous big names universities, and my advisor's like, who do you even want to work with there? And when I looked at it, it wasn't the people I really wanted to work with, so I narrowed down my list. And yeah, so matching research opportunities with what your interests are super important. I mean, PhDs are hard. They take a long time. You're going to spend a lot of time doing boring stuff. And if you don't care about the bigger picture in that lab, you might not be happy. So it's super important. And contacting the professors beforehand, I'm sure we'll get the questions like that. But like, is the thing you're contacting that person for, are they still doing that? Because I have stuff that I've done in the past. I don't do anymore, really. I don't have funding for that. It's unlikely my next graduate student's going to work on that. So to know that is really important, and you don't waste your time applying if that's not the case. And then finally, place to live, yeah, whether a climate, and nowadays political, I think you have to think about there's certain places, if you believe in certain rights, things to think about, right? And you're going to be there for a big part of your adult life, and you might end up finding a partner there and staying there, right? So just think about those things as well. Sadly, it's a reality of what's happening today. And then funding, my university in their letters of offer used to guarantee 5 years. Now they don't. They actually remove that because of the funding uncertainties that are coming. And I gave the same advice. Don't go to a place that can't guarantee you funding in one way or another for the whole length. And so I still think we're going to be able to support our students for 5 years, but it's not as official as it used to be. So that's a little scary. And I'm at a big R1 as well, right? So I assume that's going to be a common issue with offers coming up in many places, but we'll see.
If I can add, one other thing I look at when I was applying was like the type of research I was interested in. So I do tropical ecology, and I really wanted to continue doing that. So I look at like advisor, and I talk to advisors to see how willing they were on like having an international student who were interested in also like working outside the US. So my current research is in the Colombian Andes, and I'm super happy and I'm super excited. It, of course, brings some challenges in terms of funding, permits, But that was also something I decided I wanted to like get experience on, like all the process of doing like international research and like tropical research. So that's something else you can think about when you are applying, because some advisors have very like local research, and that's fair, but maybe that's not something you are interested in.
Yeah, I agree, and I was actually thinking, obviously adding to what everyone has said, maybe also looking at the variety of faculty, not only your advisor, if you want to have like a a committee that is it has like tropical ecologists or people that work in water systems or like in marine systems. Maybe there is only one researcher that is interested on that in your department, and maybe you want more people that is focusing on that, the system you're interested in.
We have a question in the chat from Alyssa. How does one go about finding funding? How do you professionally ask for funding?
I can start off on this question. So I know that the student reps should have a Google Doc that has like called like the roundup of funding opportunities. It's a great space to look for. There's a couple different headings. There's one for like fellowships, which is kind of where you would be looking for like the big funding for to fund like you as a student. And then and there's also some links to small grants as well. But if there's kind of a mix, there's obviously some of the more public fellowships like the Graduate Research Fellowship through the NSF, but that also has some limitations for international students, which unfortunately they cannot apply for that fellowship. But yeah, I would say, especially in this day and age with the way that federal funding is, like looking for some like private fellowships as well. Like I was a recent PhD student in my lab was just started applying to this like Simmons Foundation grant, but I think it would be really great to just maybe in Google too, just looking up private fellowships, biology. And yeah, I'll leave the second part of the question maybe for somebody else.
Before we move on, can one of the student reps put that link in the chat for students, that funding roundup, so that everybody has access to it? Thank you. But yeah, whoever wants to answer this question, feel free to go.
Just ask. I mean, it's a very mature question to ask when you can maybe when you and hopefully you get a Zoom interview before you visit. Just ask them, what's the funding situation like? Am I going to be expected to TA the whole time? Do you have funding from a grant? And that will really affect your ability to have crafting your own PhD. If you're getting hired on a grant, you might be more restricted to what you can do, whereas the professor might have startup, and then you might have more freedom. So it really matters. But just asking is totally fine. And then you could offer, I mean, it'd be nice if you had a little bit of knowledge, say it would be possible to apply for the JRFP with you, right? So that's a showing that you're willing to maybe write a grant with the person even before writing. But it's totally fine to ask. It's a good question. We're scientists. We're not used to, in the business world, people ask about their salaries. They ask about all that stuff, right? We tend to be shy about it, but it's totally normal. So don't be shy to ask.
Yeah, I want to piggyback off of Martin, what he just said. I think it's like, especially when I was in the interview phase, I was a little bit timid about asking some of these questions, but it really, I mean, as we've mentioned so far, it's like you're going to be in this 5-year commitment, and you really want to make sure that you're not surprised or blindsided by some of these things that you could figure out if you ask the questions. And it really shows initiative too, as someone who's like, it shows interest and initiative for wanting to work with that professor. So, yeah, the more question, or not the more, but like if you have a question that you think is, high in value of determining where you want to go to school in terms of the fit and other things, make sure to ask that.
If the audience has any other questions, feel free to raise your hand and just unmute. but if I feel like there's a lull, I can also ask another question.
If somebody is not comfortable speaking, you could just put your question in the chat also. But Austin, maybe we should just ask a question now.
Yes. How important are undergraduate grades / GPA when getting into grad school?
I can start with this one. I think it overall depends on the program you're applying. So, for example, like the program that I'm part of here at the University of Utah, we have like 4 things that we are looking at. So we're looking at the grades, but mostly not in the sense of like, oh, do you have a 4.0 GPA, but like, did you maintain, right, like a sustained GPA during your years as a bachelor undergrad student? There are other things that we also pay attention to, like previous research experience and whether, you have a relatively good idea of what you want to do in your PhD and if you have found actually like a good match in our department. So I would say that we are asked to weight these things. I think I'm missing the 4th one, which I don't remember right now. But we try to weight all of those things sort of equally. So we have had students with very low GPAs because they might have had some hardships in the past, but then after they graduated, they did some internship positions and they have like some research experience. They have some idea of what they want to do. So we do take into account all of these other things and not just the GPA. And I think maybe with that, I don't know if there is going to be a question related to that, but like when I was applying for grad school, the GRE was a requirement. And actually, I didn't get the points or the score that I should have gotten. And then my department decided to waive that requirement, right? Because, they were looking at all of the other things that I was doing. So now, well, my current department is not requiring the GRE for years now. I don't know how are other universities, but yeah, I would say that if you have maybe a low GPA, like whatever you consider that is, that you could still, talk to a professor, tell them what you want to do and see, whether you're still a good candidate for applying for that particular program.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, in my department, there's a minimum grade you need. And if you don't have that, there'd have to be special proceedings. Beyond that, it doesn't matter much. But I mean, I'll look at the transcripts when someone applies. And if it's pretty low, but they get good scores in like relevant classes and not just they don't fail all their science classes and get good scores on electives, like that's not a good sign. But yeah, there's really good people with not so great grades, but they have a lot of research experience and it's fine. Um, it's more one of them. Yeah, many ways we use to assess if the person has the background, some of the background needed to do a PhD, and also just the ability to study and learn things. But it's way less important than med school. It's nothing like med school.
We
In the
have,
case that oh, sorry.
oh, no, answer that question and then we'll go
Okay.
into another question that's in the chat.
Perfect. Yeah, I just wanted to say that in the case that there's anyone from a Latin American university that I know that like perfect GPAs are not common at all. And when you translate that to GPA, it looks like very bad. In my experience, like they didn't like it wasn't that bad, and my GPA was not like perfect at all. So yeah.
Mark had a question. How can you determine if a lab is a good fit for you? What kind of questions can you ask a PI or grad students? I also want to mention that if some of the panelists look through the chat and there's easy questions to answer, feel free to type them in. But we'll go with this question because I do feel that that's probably good to find out what's a good fit for you.
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind is to think about in terms of more on the PI side of things, like how do you want to be advised and mentored? Hopefully, after undergrad, you've had some experience with an advisor and you kind of know, do you need a little bit more hands-on with with your updates and getting feedback with your work, or do you want more of a like hands-off advisor where you have to be the one most of the times initiating those meetings or check-ins? It's something that I made sure to ask all my potential PIs, and it's a question that a lot of folks are ready to answer.
I usually also say that when talking with the grad students to see if they're happy and see if, like, if they've been in the program for 7 or 8 years and their PI just won't let them go, or I think you can gauge a lot about the atmosphere of the lab from how the grad students talk to you. So if you reach out to the PI and they said that they are accepting students, then I usually recommend after that to maybe reach out to a few of the grad students if you are planning to apply, just to see what their attitude or their vibe is kind of like and how they feel about being in the lab. And usually they'll be honest with you about their thoughts and their feelings, or you can gauge based off of the interaction that you have. So I think that's a good gauge to see if a lab is a healthy environment or not.
Completely agree with both of those points. And then on the scientific side, it's harder, right? And it's especially hard if you have less experience or less breadth in your experience of what type of research is possible and the approaches. But talking to the professor or the people in the lab and asking, what type of methods will be used? Are you a person that needs to do field work? Are you a person that really wants to do genomics and I want to do some computer modeling? And if that lab, like that's one of the questions I ask when I interview people is like, imagine you're graduating, you think about all your chapters. What type of methods do you want to try? And if the person's like, I want to do genomics, I'm going to say, go to a different lab. We do a tiny bit here, but not really, right? So that's kind of understanding. And then contacting a lab, you think they work on this, but in fact, they do this. And that was just one big paper they got on the side with a collaborator. So really understanding what the lab does, which hopefully you can tell by their papers and their website, but talking to them and making sure it matches. Now, your interests change as you go through a PhD, but if you're like already, ooh, that's not really what I want to do, maybe that's not the best place. Although you might not have an option, right? Not everyone has a bunch of offers, but um, yeah, it's a big investment, right? So some people want to do conservation, real conservation, but that's not really what the lab does. Think about it again.
On the same vein, there was a question asking, I think more questions came in, so I just lost it. But it was asking, how important is it to find a professor that is willing to be your supervisor before applying? And that's kind of in relation to the questions we've been asking. So if somebody could answer that one.
I could start. I think it also depends on the university. So in my department, we have two programs, one for EEOB, which, botanists will fall in that one. Well, most of us, I guess, unless you're doing like cellular biology with plants. But for that particular program, you have to have someone that have already sort of agreed to be your advisor. I mean, you can also apply and just list a bunch of people and, whenever the grad admissions committee meets and read the applications, they might suggest some of those students to the advisors. But I think like for our particular program, like a direct admit is like usually the way to go. And so you should have talked, to the person that you're applying with before you apply. And even if they say, well, I don't know if I'm going to have enough funding, right? Like, at least if you're writing your statement that you did talk to the person, that sort of gives you some leverage, well, when your documentation is being evaluated. So yeah, I guess it also depends on the universities. I don't know how other programs work.
At least at Cornell, there's no direct admit, but it's really important, I think, just broadly to be talking to professors who will be your main advisor, because even if they're not going to direct admit you, they will be able to kind of vouch for you potentially in the admissions process and might be able to pull your application out of a huge stack of folks who haven't applied. I think it's just great to kind of, in these conversations with asking questions about fit and about funding and all these other things, kind of seeing, yeah, do they have space to take on another student and have you be in their lab, their advisor.
All right, we have another question. Michelle is in the middle of reaching out to labs and has been asked, what are my research questions that I'd like to pursue? I've only seen and worked in labs that already determine an incoming graduate student's project, so it's daunting to try to come up with a few research questions I'd like to pursue and also not come across as unprepared or unrealistic. What are PIs asking when they're asking this question? Like how often, I guess, does that happen? We have a few questions regarding how to determine research interest or how to pivot research interest. So if anybody can answer that, that's a big question too.
Well, I don't think, well, in my experience, I don't think like a PI is expecting you to have like the perfect question that you are going to tackle during your PhD, but more like you having an interest that is aligned with the lab interest and that you are willing to do it and that you have the experience to create that question and it's going to be interested and you're going to be like happy to do that research. That's what it say.
Yeah, and maybe the best way there is to check out a couple recent papers from the lab and just, you might not fully understand them, which is totally normal, actually expected, but you might see that and say, this was interesting to me. I'd like to continue this vein, maybe go look at the mechanism or maybe look at one higher biological level, like what are the impacts of this on the community, something like that. And as a prof, it's a great question because it tells us, has this person even spent time thinking about being in my lab beyond reading the website or using AI to write an email to me, which is happening when we don't like that. And also, like, can this person talk about science? Can they formulate a question? And we don't expect you to be a postdoc here, right? It's just, can they actually talk about science beyond what they've done themselves, right? So it's a great question, but it's a difficult one. But yeah, look into what they do and then think about the next step a little bit. I think that's good enough. We really want to know, are you interested? What are you interested in? And would you be a good fit, basically?
It's also great if you say have done previous research and it turned out to be something that you don't want to pursue. You can kind of spin that in the way if they're asking you about research interests or questions, mentioning like, hey, I worked on bees and I realized that in terms of the plant pollinator interaction, I'm more interested in the plant side of questions and kind of try to elaborate, maybe not what the question is, but what things have you tried and what have you liked and what have you not liked.
For the pivot question, it depends how far the pivot is. I mean, there's a professor in my department that's incredibly successful, and she had a master's in, oh, so her undergrad was in chemical engineering, and then took one field course and then switched to ecology. So she convinced them, right? Um, so and then probably most people it's a smaller shift. For us, we want smart people that are interested in what we do. So somehow show me that your pivot is a true one, that you are, and maybe you've taken a couple classes, or I did this other stuff, but I want to do this for my PhD because I had this experience when I was young or something, and I always had this interest in this. Like that's okay as long as we can see you're smart, you have research experience and something. But pivot, it's a good time to pivot between undergrad and grad school, actually. We're mostly teaching you how to think and be a scientist, and you can fill the missing gaps, right? So, but if it's a far pivot, you have to tell us that you really do want to be what you're saying now. And it's not this like you're not changing your ideas every 2 weeks, right? Like it's something you're really serious about.
Someone in the chat asked, how difficult would it be to go straight to grad school from undergrad? Would it be best to take time to do an internship first for more experience?
Oh, and another question that asked how important is research in applying to PhD programs? So if we could cover like the importance of undergrad research prior to grad school.
I'd say for getting a PhD is probably pretty important that you have some experience or at least have an idea of what it means to do research and ask questions and kind of see projects through, even if it's just a RAU or something. I think it's important that you've had some experience doing something before diving into a PhD program fully. I think depending on what experience that you have had in undergrad, then maybe a master's would be more appropriate if you haven't had the opportunity to do much research, but you're still interested in it. That'll give you a chance to take some more classes and also do a shorter program where you're not making the 5-year commitment to something that you really aren't sure if you like yet. And if you haven't had research in undergrad, you probably also will have difficulty coming up with a research project and questions. So doing something like an internship in between or before will help you be able to be better at developing your own research questions around whatever topics that the lab that you eventually join, does.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Linus.
No, I was going to say that, if you guys haven't finished your undergrads yet, and, maybe you have one more semester, like, try your best to find some research opportunities. I know that applications are due in December, but let's say that, I don't know, you can um, I mean, depending on if you want to apply this year or next year, but like if you still have the opportunity to do some research, I would recommend you to do it. But if not, right, and then you are in this process of, well, let me see if I want to apply. I do say that you should take some time to do maybe like a summer internship or something like that, because I mean, yeah, regardless of whether the university, values or not, the fact that you have research experience actually is going to help you figure out if this is something that you would like to do, right? So some people think like, oh, I'm going to go to a PhD program because that's just the natural, pathway after going to undergrad. But like, if you don't like research, you know, this is 5 years, maybe 4.5 years of research, like half a year of classes, and then 5.5 years of research, right? So you need to be sure that this is something that you want to do and that you want to pursue, because we all know, I mean, research is hard, always don't get what you're expecting. Sometimes you have failures, right? You need to repeat stuff. So you really need to be sure that you want to do this in order to stay, motivated and like go through all of these challenges that grad school poses.
Big time. I think like in terms of the question of taking time off before grad school, I think there's never like a disadvantage to that because as mentioned, like you have more time to figure out exactly what is driving your research questions, what you potentially might want to do after grad school too, with a couple years after undergrad to kind of just mature yourself. And one thing that I didn't realize going to a small school, but now being at an R1 is for in terms of getting more research experience, like there's post-bac positions like Tisha works on, but then there's also like you can see if labs need a lab manager or a technician, and these are often spaces where you will be gaining a lot of research experience working with grad students, postdocs, or just keeping the lab, maintained. And it keeps you in the academia space, less maybe more so than an internship, but then you're also not like jumping right into grad school.
All right, we have another question about recommendation letters. So can you talk about recommendation letters and what a PI may be looking for in your rec letters? And we can take that beyond just PIs. We can talk about what departments look for in rec letters or potential fellowship opportunities.
I'm hoping you're asking that not because your professor's asking you to write your own rec letter. It happens, which is terrible. But for us, it's one of the most valuable piece of information in the application because it gives us insight into the student's performance as a researcher. Now, a rec letter from someone that's only taken a class with someone is really less informative. I mean, sometimes they're really amazing. The student was unbelievably good and all that, but like what we want to know is has this person, are they mature? Are they intelligent? Are they able to have they contributed significantly to research and maybe overcome obstacles and those kind of things? Telling us like, is this person, you know, do they have experience being a scientist? Have they dealt with problems and gone through them and overcame them, right? And do they have some basic ability and also the hard work to get through a PhD? So for us, the letters are super important, and that's really why I think if you don't have research experience, it hurts you yourself not knowing your knowledge. You don't know if you really like it, but also then your letters of reference are going to be much weaker because you don't have that. And so it's super important. And yeah, that's what I look for in there.
I would suggest to ask for those letters with some time before the deadline too, so they have the time to just write your letter and don't ask them like 2 weeks or 1 week ago or the night before the deadline. And I was asked to send like a little text reminding a professor what we did together, what classes I took with him, and the experience I had in that lab, um, just to remind him what our relationship was. I mean, they're busy and they don't remember everything.
All right, another question is, how important is it to have a full research project completed from beginning to end before applying? What if I have participated in different parts of the research process via different undergraduate experiences?
Um, what I usually will recommend is even if you only participated in a small portion of the project, just being able to articulate what the overarching goals of the project so what was the big question? If you only saw a portion of it, maybe check back in and see if they have some updates on the results, and then you can explicitly state what your contributions were to the project. So being able to communicate what exactly the project was, what you did, what were the goals, what was the significance of it. I think those kind of things are important to convey, to be able to convey to others, as opposed to just saying, I did PCR for 10 weeks on X samples. So just being able to have the science communication piece of it is important.
Yeah, and all this is on a gradient, right? Like it is better if the student was in a lab for 4 years in their undergrad and went from design to data collection to analysis to write statistical analysis to write up and they have a paper. Like clearly that's better. I mean, but that doesn't mean that's not the case for most people, right? And explaining what Taisha just said is really important. And we want the person who has research experience. But yeah, if you have the opportunity, that's why I tell my students that want to do some undergrad TAing, do you they're like, oh, I won't be back in the lab next year because I want to do some undergrad TA. I'm like, do you want to go to grad school? Stay in my lab and write up what we did. Like that's going to get you in grad school way more, much more higher likelihood. So if you have an opportunity to do more research, it's going to make you more competitive, I think, in general. So, but that doesn't mean you're excluded if you just did bits and bobs, right? That's actually normal. So.
If I can also add, I didn't do a master before applying to grad school, but I went to undergrad in Colombia, and biology is very like diverse, like a lot of classes. And I was like very motivated to continue doing research, but I wasn't sure about the research I wanted to do. So I had this like gap between undergrad and grad school, and I ran some projects. And from the beginning to the end, that sort of guided me on what type of research I wanted to do. And that was very useful. And I ended up not applying to master because yeah, I got advice from someone, and this person told me like, you know, you publish a few papers, so maybe that's the experience you needed before like jumping to a PhD. But that was definitely something that informed my decision, like studying or running a complete project. So yeah, I agree. Like research is definitely like something that can help you like make a decision. Yeah.
And I also would like to add there that there are a lot of institutions who offer like these short-term fellowships. So I know, for example, the Smithsonian in Washington, but also the Smithsonian in Panama. That's where Sarah and I met. You know, there are a lot of like 10-week to 3 months, internships that you can apply to and go there, let's say, in any time of the year. And, like if you like the work that someone is doing, you can go there, spend this time in their lab and, try to get some experience that way. And I'm sure there are, other institutions, but those are the ones that are coming to my mind right now. So if you can, right, like most times these fellowships, cover your stipends, where that you can use to cover, housing and meals, and then they also cover your flights. So I think they are great opportunities to find, some research to do before applying if that's what you want to do.
I'll also just quickly add that there's no like brownie points or anything that anyone gets for just going straight into grad school. There's no rush or anything. So if you want to take a year or two to do any of the fellowships or like the post-bac programs and things, there's a ton of them across the country that you can gain a lot of experience in 1 year, especially if you don't have any teaching commitment and you're just solely doing research 40 hours a week or so for a year straight. For example, like in the program that I work for now, the students leave with, all of the students leave with the first author paper that they get in 1 year. So there's a ton of opportunities that are available that can really boost your CV or your application or just you as a candidate. You just have to look and find them.
Okay, on a sad note, I had an REU this summer, but the program was canceled due to funding cuts. Is this happening now to master's and PhD programs now? How should I be worried about losing funding partway through?
I guess, that would depend on whether, you are being funded by a grant, right? And like if that grant was terminated. But for example, in my institution, the university is providing bridge funding to those labs who lost grant money, or like, maybe they had promised a particular student, certain years of funding and then they lost that. I don't know how long the university can do that, right? Like we also don't know how long this is going to last. Like, this is sort of uncertainty of having funding or not. But I think just a second in, I don't know if that's a word, what someone wrote in the chat that, if you have been accepted and you have been, promised, let's say, a certain amount of years, the department has the responsibility to fund you, right? So even though you might be, let's say, if you were being funded by a grant, from a particular lab that got terminated, the school or the department as a whole has to, come up with the funds to fund you. So I would say that, even though it's a scary thing to happen, right? And like sort of, anxiety producer, I feel like that's sort of in the responsibility of the administrators.
Yeah, I mean, and also like who knows what's going to happen to funding, but we had some funding cuts here or grants that just they stopped giving us the money. We got it back later, but the first people we cut are not grad students. The grad students are probably the last people we would cut. We'd cut technicians, we'd cut maybe postdocs, we don't renew them, things like that. That's not good for anyone, but grad students are like long-term investments. We need them to run the department, to teach courses. We need them to do this science, right? So they're more protected. But it is, honestly, it is a concern. If you have kids in grad school and there's a chance you lose your funding, it's something to think about as an adult. But I think it's the least likely group to really be impacted, I think, but nothing's guaranteed.
On the same vein, there was a question about going to grad school overseas. I think usually questions in this panel are how to come to the US to go to school. So, maybe a backwards way to go about it. So if anybody can talk about that. And I know, Martin, you started providing some information there, and so maybe you can add on to that.
So I did a postdoc in Switzerland. So Switzerland is like my advisor used to say it's first class. It's Germany, first class Germany. It's just like there's so much money there, it doesn't make any sense, right? So that place was amazing, and they pay their grad students like 50,000 a year. I mean, everyone in Switzerland gets a living wage. But there are Americans there. There were people from all over that did grad school. There are some really strong labs. There's not many, right? It's not a large country, but that was a really cool place, and they did really, really good science. There's very, very good schools in Canada. Again, not many, but UBC, Toronto, McGill, and a couple others are super strong. And yeah, I mean, there's good places in they're all over the world. I sorry, the little places I know. I'm Canadian, and I went to Switzerland. But it's something to consider, but also think about family situation being far away. Different language is really difficult. I know many of you have done that. So yeah, but it can be really, really valuable. If you go really far, like Australia, there's amazing schools there as well, but I've heard networking can be quite difficult. And it's not like you can pop over to every botany meeting every summer. Like that costs like 3 grand, right? So, just think about some of the trade-offs, but then you might be able to do botany in Australia, which sounds amazing, right? So, it's something to consider for sure.
Okay. Some of my professors from undergrad have expressed that I can potentially take additionally needed classes in grad school if deemed necessary for the program if I don't have them from undergrad, for example, organic chemistry. How does this usually work? What does funding/finances for classes look like?
I think in a lot of places, you're a student, you're as a grad student, and so you can take any class for free. But like places like yeah, you can take any class for free, but it's just good to, take classes that are, you need necessary for the program, as your advisors in undergrad have said. But it works just like normal. Like there's a lot of some of the like first year grad classes are sometimes like upper level undergrad classes, and then like intro grad student classes. Um, but it's pretty, I feel like, normal to have coursework.
Yeah, exactly. And like some programs, for example, you have, yeah, like certain number of credits that you need to complete. And, they might tell you that certain percentage of those have to be from, I don't know, grad level or upper level, upper division. And then if you do need something at a lower sort of like level, I guess, um, you know, even though sometimes it's not possible, just like to enroll on those classes, you can always like sit on the classes, or like, how do you say it, audit the class. At the end, I feel like it's super easy, yeah, to take even more classes than you needed. But yeah, keeping in mind that, you do have some requirements for coursework, and then, you should be able to finish all of those as soon as possible so that you can start doing your research.
I know I'm probably not allowed to do this, but I will chime in and say, at my institution, what happens for first year grad students is that they get together a panel of faculty members, and the faculty members look over their undergraduate transcripts or just like any previous transcripts and identify gaps in knowledge and recommend classes that they take. And so that may be something, I don't know how common that is for other departments, or institutions, but that may be something to sit down with your advisor, just go through like previous knowledge and identify gaps.
I think we have another question. How do you go about writing, publishing research if you only worked on graduate student projects? I know that Martin responded, but maybe we can elaborate a little further on, I guess, for undergrads, I think sometimes it's the idea of publishing and how research translates into writing sometimes gets a little lost. So if we could cover that, just so everybody can have that information.
I guess I can speak generally. So I've had many undergrads in my lab. Some of them just help out. Literally, they count things. They're happy. They get a letter reference. They get a line. They apply to med school. They're happy. Others, they're super into ecology and evolution. They start doing an independent research project. Maybe they get summer funding. They're around for a while. And in rare cases, we start writing a paper together. Rare cases, because it takes a ton of time, right? And that's like so I had an undergrad actually at UConn. She's not at UConn. Um, publish, and she was the first author. In other cases, they're helping a grad student. The grad student's going to write it up. They're a co-author. So all kinds of possibilities happen, but it takes a long time to go from even getting your data set to publishing, especially if there's some serious statistical analysis between there. And most undergrads don't do that. I didn't publish an undergrad, even though I worked on tons of projects. Um, so don't feel bad that you don't. It's more important that you have experience, describe what you've done, how you contributed, that you actually understand what you did. Sometimes students are, you talk to them and you realize they had no idea what they were doing. They were just following orders, right? So you want to make sure you internalize why you're doing the science. And if you can contribute on a paper, that's great. But I don't expect that. But obviously, if a student has written two first author papers, they're going to be more competitive than one that hasn't, right? But that's not required. That's what grad school is for, to learn those skills, in my opinion. Um, yeah, so I think that covers it, I think, in my view.
We have like 6 minutes left, but there's a really good question here. How are some of the ways you as a graduate student, past or current, manage and balance your time? How do you ensure you are hitting your goals, checkpoints, and what do you do if when you feel stuck? I think that's going to be a question you ask forever, but I think this is a good place to get some of our grad students on the panel to answer.
Okay, I can take a stab at this question. So, in terms of hitting my goals and checkpoints, that's something that is really important to, talk to your advisor about, being very candid about, hey, like, I'd love some feedback. Like, do you think I am, reaching the goals or the checkpoints that you think I need to graduate? Because, and this also could be a conversation with your whole committee. I think at a lot of schools, those people on your committee are the ones who decide, if you get your degree. And so if they, checking in with them, making sure that they think you're on schedule is really the way to make sure that, you can graduate in the timetable that you guys have set up as a group. Something I personally have been feeling a lot stuck recently with some of my chapters, and one thing that I've really liked to do is one, like sit in that feeling of being stuck. Sometimes it just takes being in the shower or something and having a random thought that comes up, and in that, then I can try a new direction. But um, for some people, it works to have multiple projects going at some time to when you get stuck in one, go to the other. Sometimes that leads to like, nothing getting done. So it's kind of up to you. But for me, I like being able to kind of bounce between like at least just two projects when I do feel stuck in one.
I can also add having a community that was very challenging to me at the very beginning because I was the only international in my cohort and I felt like super strange and like weird. So it was hard to me to socialize. But then I realized like how important it is to have a community, because sometimes you don't have all the ideas, but just talking with people, you get more ideas. Just grab a coffee, have good conversations. And when I started like getting in contact also with the community I have in Colombia, where my project is based on, that also helped me a lot, because you realize also that you're not the only one having like issues with your research and like, yeah, being stuck. So that's something else. And that also helps with your life balance, because it's part of academia, like having these breaks, conversation, like scientific conversations, but in like a nice way, like the coffee break. So I know it's hard, especially at the very beginning when you move from far, when you have language barrier or like other type of like barriers, but it's something super important, like networking and having a community and knowing that you have like someone around.
And that's something that you can really ask the grad students that you're reaching out to, see what they like to do for hobbies, figure out, what is there for community within organizations at the school, and, ask about, the things that you use right now to ground yourself, see, what are the opportunities at those potential institutions.
I think it helps a lot knowing that all of us will feel stuck at some point, and that most of people have overcome that. So just keep going and try to stay positive as far as you can.
All right, we are coming to an end. I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. So, Imenya dropped a link to a survey in the chat. This is an anonymous survey to provide feedback for this event. So if you are willing to, please fill it out. I do want to share my screen and tell everyone that if you're not a BSA member, please join. We are a very welcoming community, I would like to say. And if you are a BSA member or you plan on becoming a BSA member, there are multiple opportunities for professional development as well as funding opportunities. So thank you everyone for joining this event, and we hope to see you at the next Botany 360. Thank you.
I would also like to mention that if you are unable to purchase a BSA membership, there is financial aid for students. And also, if you have an advisor in undergrad, they can actually purchase one for you that is cheaper than if you purchased it for yourself. So there are definitely options to become a member that are little to no money to you.